Hello, this is Monica Flannery. Welcome our girly chat we're having here with two what are we calling ourselves? Two old white chicks.
It's two old white chicks.
This is my friend Nancy Orr, and we've met and we've shared some stories, and I really felt very compelled to bring Nancy's story online. I also share some of her experience, and I'm learning a great deal, and I wanted to bring this to a bigger audience because I feel the information that she has experienced and compiled in her wisdom is extremely helpful, especially today. Okay. So my first question, well, Nancy is from Richmond, Virginia, and we have the common interests, and I would like to hear your story and what you would like to share.
Okay, well, I'll give the Reader's Digest version, and then go into follow that up with a longer, more detailed version. Okay, so I had COVID in December, a couple months ago. Sorry, I'm fiddling with my camera here. So this is April. So yeah, in December, mid-December, I came down with COVID. My housemate, who's 73, I'm 62 now. I was 61 then. We both have comorbidities. He first started to get symptoms, and a couple weeks later, I developed symptoms. But prior to us getting COVID, my doctor made me aware of. I was asking him about hydroxychloroquine because I wanted to have some on hand in case I got sick or to use it prophylactically based on the information I had seen about it. And he said that he would prefer that I use ivermectin if I got sick with COVID. And I had never heard anything. I'd never heard of it before then. But so I started doing a little bit of research and was impressed with what I saw. So come the end of November, right after Thanksgiving, my friend Dan started to get sick. He brought it back from visiting his daughter and teenage granddaughters from Thanksgiving. And so I was nursing him for a good 11 days.
Mm.
And the short version is I finally got the prescription of ivermectin from my doctor. I let him know that Dan was sick, and he called the prescription in. Dan didn't take his first dose until the day 11 of his symptoms. And within 8 hours, I'd say, his headache and his fever, which had been pretty constant for those 11 days, went away. And I experienced a similar thing, only I took the ivermectin on day 1 of my symptoms, and when that's an edit moment. So within 2 hours after I took ivermectin, my fever. Okay, so when I took ivermectin on day 1 of my symptoms, at the end of the day, within 2 hours, my fever and a really strong feeling of illness went away. So
That's interesting.
yeah, and about 14 days later, I also had what my doctor thinks was a pulmonary embolism. It was
Wow.
obviously minor, and I was not hospitalized. But again, I took another dose of ivermectin, and within hours, it resolved. So I'm a believer in ivermectin. So and Dan's fine. He was in the hospital for 10 days. By the time that he had taken ivermectin, it was day 11 of his symptoms, and he had already developed pneumonia by that time. So he needed to be in the hospital with supplemental oxygen. He never went on a ventilator. He did spend 3 days in ICU. But he did take 2 doses of ivermectin the morning of when he went to the hospital, and then 2 days later, which was the protocol. So I'm a believer. I mean, at that time, I didn't know whether it worked or not. And when he went into ICU, I really didn't know if it worked. but neither of us have any ill lingering harm, damage from having COVID. So I'm a believer.
And
I'm a believer, especially since my doctor says that he thinks I had a minor pulmonary embolism, and the ivermectin took care of it. So that's the long and short of it. I'm continuing. I mean, that's the short of it, not the long and short. We're going to go into the long of it, but that's the short version. I think it saved both of our lives, quite frankly.
And the part that really fascinates me is that your doctor recommended this ivermectin, and I've been doing a lot of questions for people that have, uh, been around people that have had COVID, and many people have no idea what ivermectin is.
Yes. Well, so my doctor, his name is Leland Stillman, and he's in Colonial Heights, Virginia. And I met him early October, just barely 2 months before I got COVID. And when he mentioned that to me, I started looking into it, and a video I watched was of Dr. Paul Marik. And I think the other guy, the Indian guy, is Dr. Mobeen. But they were going over ivermectin and its method of action. And I was really impressed with what I was seeing. And Dr. Paul Marik, I was already familiar with him. He's the chair of pulmonology and critical care medicine in Norfolk at the Eastern Virginia Medical School. And I first became aware of him several years ago when I noticed something in the news about the success that he was having in treating sepsis with high doses of intravenous vitamin C and thiamine. High doses, like 600,000 milligrams intravenously.
Right.
So I was already familiar with his name, and so that already lent him credibility in my eyes. So I was ready and willing to take it if I needed to. And the research that I did, and what Paul Marik shared, Dr. Marik shared about its safety and how long it's been around since it was discovered. I think this is really kind of interesting. It's just one of those funny, geeky things of its origin that someone discovered it from a microbe in the soil outside of Tokyo.
That's interesting.
And that discoverer and developer, and I don't know his name, but he won the 2015 Nobel Prize in, I think, biochemistry. But it's an essential medicine with the WHO. Close to 4 billion humans have taken it around the world, and it's over the counter in much of the world where there is high parasitic infections. Sub-Saharan Africa, India, probably South America too. So, but I guess so. That's the short version. The studies that have been coming out since the fall that I've been keeping up with and Dr. Paul Marik, he and other doctors created an alliance last March, a year ago, called the Frontline COVID Critical Care Alliance, FL as in Frontline, CCC.net. That's the website. And this alliance, their purpose was to research and find existing therapies that could treat COVID-19 patients. And one of those other doctors, Dr. Pierre Kory, Kory, who has testified before the U.S. Senate a couple times. Last year, he did it on recommending the use of steroids in treating inflammation in COVID patients. And at the time, I guess the medical community was saying, no, don't do that. But then they found out very quickly, yes, that's now a standard care to damage.
Absolutely.
Dan was immediately put on intravenous steroids when he was admitted to the hospital. So, and then they also testified in December on ivermectin.
Mm-hmm.
And then also did a presentation to the NIH in early January. And the NIH did upgrade their recommendation on ivermectin, but it wasn't from a position of against its use in treating COVID, except in clinical trials, to neither for or against. So it's a neutral recommendation, which doesn't sound very impressive, but monoclonal antibodies and convalescent plasma are both offered to COVID patients in the hospital. Dan was offered convalescent plasma, and that has the same neutral recommendation status. So hopefully, since January, that doctors in hospitals treating hospitalized patients hopefully feel more comfortable in offering ivermectin, because it's a game changer. The research and the data that's now quite voluminous. Over 15,000 patients have been treated, and it's overwhelmingly positive that it makes a huge difference in treating COVID, and also showing that it prevents infection and transmission, and also is helpful in treating those who have had COVID and have what's called long haulers, still have symptoms from the disease. So,
and I think a major component too, because the clotting factor is one of the major concerns across the board, and ivermectin seems to be very beneficial in reducing those risks, right?
Yes, well, and I experienced that when I was sick too. So I took a dose on day one, at the end of the day when I had symptoms, and then 2 days later. And my congestion also was diminishing that I had woken up with. And about 10 to 14 days later, I started to experience a weird tenderness in my upper left arm that went over the shoulder into the upper part of my torso. And that was like, what is this? And I was watching it, and I noticed some redness and a little heat. And then on the 5th day of watching that, this was the 30th of December, so it was right before New Year's Eve, I noticed that I couldn't take I couldn't get a full breath. So I didn't feel alarmed because I could still breathe. And I went out in the backyard. I'm still in quarantine. Dan's home home from the hospital by now, and he's been home for about 10 days, because he came home on the 20th of December. And so I'm doing deep breathing, and I just noticed that the top part of my lungs felt inhibited. I couldn't breathe in there. And my doctor's office was closed. My chiropractor's office was closed. And so I just took another dose of ivermectin because it was, why not? It's safe. And I was thinking, well, oh gosh, is this COVID in my arm and now in my lungs? But so when I woke up the next morning, my lungs were fine. My breathing was back to normal. And over the next 3 or 4 days, the arm tenderness resolved. And when I talked with my doctor on January 4th and gave him the symptoms, he wanted me to come in and maybe take a CT scan, because he said it sounds like I had a clotting event and that he thinks I might have had obviously a minor pulmonary embolism. But when he examined me, my lungs were fine, my arm was fine. We decided that doing a CT scan was not called for, because it wouldn't change whether it would show anything at that point, since I no longer had any symptoms, number one, and it wouldn't change what he recommended, which was he put me on Eliquis, a blood thinner, for a while. And so a couple weeks ago, when I was watching an update video on the Frontline COVID Critical Care Alliance, they have weekly update videos. And they were talking about this clotting issue. And how ivermectin was restoring the natural flow, unclumping, I guess you could say, uncoagulating. I don't know if it's,
Right.
I guess it's anticoagulant activity.
Yes.
Like, oh my God, that's what happened to me. That's what it was. So, I mean, for me, ivermectin from soup to nuts. So I've been taking it prophylactically a little bit because of its anti-inflammatory properties and also the anticoagulant properties, since I did have that coagulation issue. And
I'm holding my phone.
okay.
We're improvising.
Anyway, we may have to do a third one of these. Anyway,
Either that or I got major editing software, so this will be a good
practice.
Yes, ma'am.
And also you can leave in some natural humorous moments. Anyway, so that's the short version. I think so I know personally that it stops COVID, it treats it, and that it treats the clotting. It's also anti-inflammatory, antiviral, anti-inflammatory, anticoagulating. So it's pretty impressive. Yeah, and so that's kind of that's the short version. But it's high. I always direct people to the Frontline COVID Critical Care website because they have downloads. They have a wealth of information. They have links to the studies. They have a summary of the studies. There have been like 25 studies, I think 15 random control studies, and over 15,000 patients in those studies. So it's not anecdotal.
No, not at all.
It's not just observational retrospective studies at all. So it's unfortunate that it's not being shouted from the rooftops. I know that the Frontline COVID Critical Care Network has been trying to get the word out since probably before December, but that's when they did on December 4th their press release. But on their website, there's the protocols for prevention, for early treatment, for hospital treatment, videos, testimonies of people who have had COVID turned around and saved their life, and other doctors and interviews from other doctors in parts of the world where they're using ivermectin heavily to treat COVID. And it's becoming, a non-issue in those parts of the world.
And I was highly impressed by the protocols because it's very specific. I mean, it tells you exactly the dosage and a lot of other vitamins and so forth that you can complement to get the maximum relief and therapy.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. It has vitamin D, vitamin C, zinc, quercetin, melatonin, and aspirin, which I forgot to take when I got sick, and that I only took two doses of the ivermectin at the time may have kept the window open for that the clotting issue to happen. But I'm glad it did, because now I know it worked. I know ivermectin works, and that was without aspirin. So, but the protocol does call for aspirin if you're sick. An adult aspirin, 25 milligrams aspirin, which is just an adult aspirin. Yeah, so it's quite comprehensive, the information that is available there, and also has the dosing. Ivermectin is known mostly as an antiparasitic, or the more common term is dewormer. And
on that note,
horses, cattle.
Right. But you know what's interesting, because some people, they get very surprised by that information.
Yeah.
And holistic coaches that I know, part of their protocol is to do detoxes, and it's to remove parasites, which we never address in allopathic medicine. So it's really not all that, you know, weird or, it's actually a natural thing that a lot of cultures use.
Right. Antiparasitics.
Yeah.
Dewormers.
Yes. Yep. Wormwood is a good one that they
Right.
use a lot.
I think walnut
Yep.
tincture is also used for as an antiparasitic. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so it's quite an amazing molecule, ivermectin. So it has multi-action, multi-functions. So would you like me to go back to the beginning of the story?
Sure.
Well, so I've told you that had COVID, and it was ivermectin that saved me. I didn't have to experience advanced and severe course of illness, which I'm grateful for. Um, but when COVID started unfolding back last year in March, like everyone else, I was making my own masks and masking up and keeping my eyes glued. Well, I was working, so I wasn't home, but every day tuning into the updates about COVID. And at the point where Trump started to talk about hydroxychloroquine and
Mm-hmm.
chloroquine and all that brouhaha, all that outrage that he was talking about, um, that kind of got my attention. I was just kind of curious about hydroxychloroquine. What is this? And it wasn't because I'm a Trump supporter. And no, I mean no offense to anyone, but when Trump got elected, I felt traumatized.
And I think that's good to add, because a lot of people, correlate the two together and they're two different issues.
Yeah, so I had
So I
no.
appreciate that.
I was not a Trump supporter, and I've been, I've always voted Democratic. Not a officially party, not official Democrat, but I've always voted Democrat and consider myself a liberal progressive. So I didn't have any great affinity for Trump. So, but I was curious about hydroxychloroquine. What is this? And hydrochloroquine. And so I just started looking into it online, researching it, and it's the more I looked into it, it seemed like, well, this seems logical and legitimate. Clinicians are having success in early treatment and prevention. Why aren't we? What's the big deal here? And why is the outrage and all the issues, the raising the questions about safety when hydroxychloroquine has been around since 1955, like
Yes.
70 years, and its most known FDA approved. Well, it was a derivative of quinine, and originally it was developed to be a anti-malarial, but they also found out that it, because of its anti-inflammatory properties, it's most widely used in the U.S. to treat people with lupus and rheumatoid arthritis, which are autoimmune inflammatory conditions. So, but its safety profile was pretty well set. I mean,
Yeah.
the only thing that there had been some issues, very rare, with some long-term or some very specific heart issues.
Mm-hmm.
But by and large, that was very rare. But that was blown up, and that kind of, the more I looked at that and was going, this doesn't make sense. Why are they dissing this? Why are they trying to discredit this drug that's been FDA approved for 70, I think 70 years, or something like that, but been in use.
Mm-hmm.
And
Great question.
yeah, and great, curious minds, inquisitive minds want to know.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, and then what really got my attention was when the Lancet Journal and the New England Journal of Medicine. Well, and I've not read the New England Journal of Medicine one, but I'm most familiar with the Lancet Journal. There was an article that maybe in about a year ago, sometime in April, came out discrediting or saying that hydroxychloroquine actually did not show any positive effectiveness in treating COVID patients, and it actually showed that it was harmful. And this was supposedly based on data collected around the world, based on 90,000 patients from around the world. And within 2 weeks, that article was retracted because when the provider of the data, the raw data, was asked for the raw data, they refused to provide it. So I think that was a company named Sturgisphere, but it turns out it was fabricated.
Yes.
Completely fabricated. And something was similar to the New England Journal of Medicine. There was something, I think, a similar situation. So that was like, what?
And also, I just wanted to bring out one point, because while people were taking the hydrochloroquine, usually it was for years. Like the troops would take it for years. And when you're looking at the contraindications for the heart, if there was any heart, problems that came from it, when you think about COVID, it's a very short duration. So, it's like apples and oranges too. Like that you're using it for a short period of time. And
Yeah. Well,
right.
yeah. Well, and they don't even, when they diagnose or put someone on hydroxychloroquine for lupus or rheumatoid arthritis, they don't even go through a cardiac screening.
Mm-mm.
So if it really were an issue, they would do that. So that was really overblown. And then the retraction of those articles and the fraud. And then that wasn't enough to get my attention even more. Like, what's going on here? I mean, it seems like there's an agenda to suppress an effective treatment. And why would that be the case? Didn't make sense, but seemed obvious at that point that that's what was going on to me. I mean, just little old me.
I agree with you.
And
Yes, I have so many questions.
yeah. And then I guess the WHO and the University of Oxford were this was still in that same time period where they were launching trials to see if hydroxychloroquine could be effective. And it was found out that the dosing that they were using and it was a solidarity trial and the recovery trials. They were using like 6 times the normal dose, which the fatal dose, or I guess toxic dosage for hydroxychloroquine, has been known since the 70s. And then what had been being used and what has been being used was 200 milligram pills of hydroxychloroquine total for a day, and like 5 days. There might be a loading dose of 800 or 600 on the first day. And of course, they also were taking zinc. That was important that they were taking zinc with it, because the hydroxychloroquine acts as an ionophore. Well, it actually acts in a number of ways to inhibit viral replication. Mm-hmm. But one of the big things it did was help to the zinc get access, cross into the cells where the zinc inhibited viral replication. So that's what its primary action. Although the hydroxychloroquine in and of itself also had multiple ways in which within the cell that it inhibited viral replication. But so it's been well known since the 70s what a lethal dosage was. And so the WHO in the Solidarity trials and the University of Oxford in the recovery trials were using like 2,400 milligrams a day. And they were using only very sick, advanced cases of COVID, very ill patients. That was, and so it seemed like that, number one, it seems criminal to use near lethal dosage of a medicine when that has been known for decades and decades.
And no treatment for early symptoms.
Right, and these were advanced patients, so they weren't using the protocol that the doctors, the clinicians that were having success with using hydroxychloroquine, which was either for very early, probably within the first 5 days of illness, of symptom presentation. So that was very off-putting and very, I would say, what would be a word? Well, shocking.
Yeah.
I mean, what can you do with that? That the WHO and the University of Oxford are intentionally giving patients, already very sick patients, near fatal dosage, knowingly giving them. I don't know. But that also just kind of like, that was like the nail in the coffin for me in terms of, okay, they're trying to persuade everyone that they don't want people to use hydroxychloroquine. They don't want to prevent the spread of this disease. Why is that? And so that's shocking and alarming and frightening. And then in Virginia, our Commissioner of Health late in March issued a letter discouraging physicians from prescribing hydroxychloroquine for off-label use to treat COVID patients, and encouraging pharmacists to use their professional judgment in whether they would fill a prescription from a doctor if it was going to be used for an off-label purpose, like to treat a COVID patient. And I found that alarming too, because now that it seems like it works, there's a lot of information, clinicians having success, and then the retraction of the journal articles based on fraudulent data, and the trials using near fatal dosages. So they seemed like they were being designed to fail. So it's like, and then the Virginia government starting to, trying to prevent people from gaining access to something to use as a prevention and early treatment. And I found that very alarming.
That's why I felt so compelled to bring your story to life, because every time I speak to you, you have a wealth of knowledge. I mean, I'm just starting to learn about all these different protocols and how they work. And the information that you have acquired is just very impressive to me. And what I keep asking is, they had these therapies available. I have my own COVID story too that I'll be sharing. But which they gave me Levaquin.
This is Monica Flannery from Serenity RN YouTube. I want to thank Nancy Orr for sharing her very personal but yet very inspirational story, her COVID story. And we had to end the program where it was because, interesting enough, our connections were starting to give us a little bit of problems. So we're going to end the interview here.